21 days prayer and fasting. How's it going? Yeah. That's a subdued response at best. We are in 21 days prayer and fasting. If you have not joined in with us, it's not too late. We finished week 1. You have 14 days left. You can jump in. If you don't have one of the little booklets, we ordered some more from the printers. They're outside at the table as you leave. They're updated. The first version we had the wrong dates at the end, but now they're accurately dated. If that was a stumbling block for you before, that's all cleaned up. Also online, you can pick up the information there in terms of what fasting is all about, what praying is all about. I'm not going to recap the whole thing from last week, but basically we're looking at a season to break out of normalcy. We're looking at the power of prayer to change things. We looked last week at 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, where God says, you do this, and then I'll do that. You humble yourself, you seek my face, you pray, you turn from your wicked ways. And then, those conditions being met, I will hear what you've got to say. I will forgive you. I will heal your land. And so, Old Testament, still applies in the New Testament. And so we're people in covenant with God, saved by grace through faith, who still understand, hopefully, that things are released. Breakthrough happens by asking, by seeking the face of God. Today, we're going to look at another secret of breakthrough. Last week, we called it secrets of breakthrough. I call it secrets of breakthrough because whenever you say there's a secret involved, people listen. People tune in. Actually, you can look at how many people watch on the website. When you have that secret in there, boy, they jump in. You're going to tell me something I don't know. Today, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, but I'm going to tell you something that none of us actually do the way we're supposed to be doing it. It's another secret of breakthrough. It is, I'd suggest to you, breakthrough that involves a kind of power that we need that is the most overlooked and underestimated kind of power out there. It doesn't get talked about a lot. It's called staying power. Staying power. Not something that's as sexy as immediate, in the moment, let's get it done power. And that's because, we live in a time when 15 minutes of fame is what it's all about. But we've got a God who looks at the second and third generation after us. And we need to be people that have more of a long-term view in terms of what it's all about. Staying power can be defined simply as long obedience in the same direction. We want to understand what this is all about. And how we serve a God that celebrates long-term faithfulness, and understand that real power to change nations comes with long-term faithfulness. Talked about this a while back, but it's kind of the difference between avalanches and glaciers. Avalanches are wonderful in the spiritual metaphor sense, because what's an avalanche do? It's an instantaneous, momentary outpouring of power that knocks down trees and can somewhat change the landscape of an area temporarily. But glaciers, not nearly as exciting. But glaciers are what carve out a Yosemite. Glaciers are what changes the landscape in a permanent kind of way. And we want to be people that celebrate the avalanches that God brings in the moment. That outpouring of his power that just gives us goosebumps as we see it happen. And we want to be people that understand the staying power, the glacier power that needs to be in place for our lives. I was looking this week at a little story that Eugene Peterson wrote. Eugene Peterson is the guy who put together the Message paraphrase version of the Bible. He also coincidentally wrote a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. But he was talking about how he was at his lake house in Montana watching a kingfisher do its thing, which is fish. It's a bird that fishes, okay? And he said that actually he watched it patiently and counted the number of attempts it took before that kingfisher caught its first fish. He said it took 37 tries before the kingfisher came up with the first fish. So, how about you? Are you a 37 trier? Or are you, let me see if God gives it to me when I ask, and if he does, wonderful, and he doesn't, that's it. I mean, we need to see this idea of long obedience, of staying power as a theme for our life. We tend to be people that overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 to 2 years and underestimate what God can accomplish through us in 10 to 20 years. And it's something that I think we need to kind of get straightened out in our in our minds. I mean, Paul's letter to the Philippians said that he who began a good work in you is going to bring it to completion over a lifetime. He's not going to bring it to completion tomorrow. Hopefully you're not going to be finished tomorrow. It's a lifetime, a stretched out process. If, and there's a contingency here, the deal is this: if we stay humble and hungry. You know, we believe, I believe in the sovereignty of God, in the power of God who does things in a no matter what kind of way. But there's a whole lot in our lives that are contingent on some ifs. If we stay humble, if we stay hungry in going after it, then and only then do we fulfill our destinies. What I want to do today is jump in and look at this matter of staying power and what it looks like. I mean, faith, the kind of faith that we're looking at and we need to be striving to live out as a culture of faith is not a faith that is shown by a willingness to start new things, but a faith that's shown by a willingness to finish things. That's where faith really comes in. You know, just about anybody can start something. I mean, you can call it faith when you start something off, but it doesn't really take a whole lot of faith to kind of try to get the ball rolling. Faith comes in when the ball doesn't roll so fast. Faith comes in when it takes a long time to get to where you think that thing you started is supposed to be going. Faith is about being willing to finish things out. I mean, sometimes you know things theoretically, but you've got to go through it to actually appreciate what it's really all about. And I think this matter of staying power really falls into that category. I mean, I hope I'm starting to make sense here. You and I both probably know that staying power is necessary to break through. Perseverance is necessary to get to where God wants you to be. And theoretically, you go, okay, I got it. But knowing it theoretically and actually living through it, two different things. I mean, best example of that, wedding days versus marriages, right? Wedding day, you give people the vows they're supposed to be speaking. You talk to people about the commitment they're going to be making. You say, this ain't going to be easy. This is going to be stormy. I mean, I've gotten to where I tell people, this is going to be awful at times. And are you ready for this? Yes, I got staying power. I've got staying power. And the truth is, you think you do. You think you've got it until you go through the storms. I mean, look at the Bible. The Bible is so great with so many metaphors on God, you know, moving mountains, on chains being broken, and on of course, you know, storms coming and us getting through them. But we've got to actually experience these things, commit to having staying power through the storm, but then we've got to understand we've got to live out the commitments that we make. We've got to live out the theoretical concepts that we have of it in day-to-day living. I mean, storms. We're going to look at a literal one in just a second. Storms, you probably heard the old saying before. With a storm in your life, you're either in one right now, you just got out of one, or you're about to go through one. I mean, they come and go in life. They're always there. But right now, what's going on with us? All of us, everybody here. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 storm. We've been there for, almost 6 months now? I mean, and then throwing on top of COVID-19, we've got political turmoil. We've got a presidential election coming up, which always brings turmoil. But this year, I think more than in my lifetime I've ever seen before. You got racial tensions coming in. It's a storm. It's a storm out there. And so what do we do? Well, let's look at what staying power looks like for that. And then look also at some particular areas where it counts in individual circumstances of our lives. I want to look at a literal storm in Acts chapter 27 today. Acts chapter 27, this is where the Apostle Paul is traveling to Rome. Now, again, context, big picture context, if you look at Acts and Paul's epistles, Paul felt that he was called to Rome. I mean, Paul, for looks like most of his ministerial life, felt like Rome was in his future. Rome was a destiny that he needed to head towards. Only thing is now, in Acts chapter 27, his destiny is being fulfilled, but not like he thought it would be, because he isn't going there voluntarily. He's going there in chains. He's a prisoner that's being taken by ship to Rome. And then we're going to read some of the verses, not all of them. Let me just give you the context of where we are in Acts chapter 27. He gets on the ship, and the ship takes off across the Mediterranean, and they get to an island, I think it was Crete, and weather's not looking good, stormy season's starting to kick in, and Paul actually tells the captain of the ship, look, I think we need to stay put. I think we need to stay put here because the storms are about to come. And the captain says, no, we don't like it here so much. We're going to take our chances and take off, see if we can't make it. And of course, that's what they do. Paul's overruled. They take off, and then, just as Paul predicted, the storm season hits, and it's a big one this year. Big one this year that looks like it's about to take out the ship. So let's pick up at Acts chapter 27, verse 21, and see what all this has to do with staying power. It says there, when they had gone a long time without food, they're in the middle of the storm now. In fact, they're in the middle of a storm, and they were so afraid and so busy trying to keep the ship together that they weren't even eating. When they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, like Paul would, you should have listened to me. I told you so. Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now, I urge you, keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood before me, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You are going to fulfill your destiny. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you and all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe that God will turn out exactly as I've been told. But we must run aground on a certain island. So he's saying they're all going to live, but there's going to be a shipwreck. We're all going to live, but there's going to be a shipwreck that's going to happen. Now, what happened is, as you read on through Acts 27, they start approaching an island, and they put down a depth finder, and every time they put it down, it's getting shallower and shallower and shallower. That means they're about to run up on the rocks and suffer shipwreck. The sailors recognize that. On the ship, there are sailors, there are soldiers, there are prisoners. All the sailors then tell the commander of the soldiers, look, we need to go one more time and check for the depths again, and they start to let down a lifeboat to do that. Paul says they're not really doing that. They're going to take off and leave the ship. And then Paul in verse 31 says, look, you can't let them leave because unless these guys stay with the ship, we're not going to be saved. Now, you see the connection here? You see the paradigm that we're put in, the paradox rather that we're put in. God has told Paul, and Paul has repeated, on the one hand, nobody's going to die. And then he says to the captain, he says, nobody's going to die, but only if everybody stays put. Only if everybody stays put. And so the commander now is listening to Paul. He cuts the lifeboat loose, lets it fall into the ocean, and everybody's going to stay put. So what happens? What's the end of the story? End of the story is the ship falls apart on the rocks, just like the sailors had thought. But everybody's saved, just like God had promised. There's a connection here that, again, is something we've got to draw out of the story, but it's not hard to draw out. God said, I'm going to bring you to your destiny, but you got to stay where I've put you in order for that destiny to be fulfilled. You can't just go flying off just because it looks difficult. Again, it's this whole matter of sticking with things. It's this whole matter of persevering. It's this whole matter of needing staying power. You know, it's so easy to start things and so hard to finish them. You've probably heard this little analogy before between pioneers and settlers in the Christian world. That some are pioneers, they go out and start new things, and some are settlers, they put roots down and make things grow and go. You know, I think it's a horrible analogy, a horrible description, because that's not really even a description of a pioneer. That's a made-up thing, completely made up. Because what does a pioneer really do? I mean, look historically at what pioneers did. Pioneers left and went out and established settlements, and they put their roots down. They were pioneers who became settlers. I mean, if they went out and didn't actually put something down, they were a scout. They weren't a pioneer. Pioneers go and they stay. Pioneers are settlers. It's the idea of not making excuses for ourselves that we're just not the kind of people who have the makeup to stick with things. You better develop the makeup to stick with things. The idea is God has called all of us to have staying power. Yes, there are times when we come and go and all of that, fine and good. But don't use your unwillingness to stay put in difficult situations as an excuse. Don't try to put on yourself this label of I'm a pioneer as opposed to a settler, and that somehow frees you from the obligation of going through the hard times that we're all supposed to go through in order to get to the destinies that God has for each one of us. There's a guy who came to town several years ago who was going to plant a church here. In Kona. And we'd already been going here for a few years, and things were going along okay. And so he said, could I have lunch with you and talk with you about what's the secret of making a church stick in Kona? And first of all, I don't know this guy. I don't know what his gift set is. I don't know whether God's called him here. I don't know anything. But I said, look, I don't know all of the details that go into your package, but I can tell you this one thing that's going to be required to make it stick. You've got to stay here for 10 years. You've got to make a commitment that you're going to be here for 10 years. You can't come in here and think in 1 year or even 2 years, you're going to make this thing fly. I mean, number one, you don't look like you're from here. And so nobody's going to give you any credibility from the get-go. And so you better be willing to stick here long enough to gain credibility that only happens as time is put in. You can be the most gifted person in the world, and yet the staying power is what's going to lend to the credibility before people and before God. That's going to put you in a place where maybe things will work out. Now, maybe not, because just because you determine you're going to stay somewhere for 10 years doesn't automatically mean success. But I think it's a condition that's got to be in place for a lot of us, not 10 years, but that commitment for staying power to stick with things. I mean, the idea, again, is that we need to understand that it's not always going to be easy as we go through these things. I mean, this is the way life works out in so many different areas. I mean, it's true with our prayer life. It's true with all aspects of our life with Jesus. It was true with Paul. I mean, he started a lot of different churches, and that was great, but he's showing here that the greatest power comes with what you're willing to stay with. I mean, starters tend to be people that are emotional and they're led by their feelings. Not necessarily a bad thing, but also not a stable thing. Stayers are ones that aren't moved primarily by emotions and feelings, but stayers are people that are moved by faith and the obedience of faith. That so often means, again, a long obedience that goes in the same direction. So the question that we have to ask ourselves in the areas where God has called us, not just randomly, but where God has called us. Do you have staying power? Do you have staying power in your marriage? Do you have staying power with your kids? Do you have staying power with your business? Do you have staying power in whatever church God has put you in or whatever ministry God has called you to? Do you have that staying power that needs to come into play? I mean, if you've been trying things for a little while and there's no breakthrough, a lot of things could be in play. A lot of things might still need to be done. But one thing, again, that I'd almost guarantee you has to be there. A staying power, a persistence. Again, like Jesus said, keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. We keep on with it, and it's not giving up. I mean, you've got a destiny. I've got a destiny. I think as a church together, we've got a destiny. But the only way we reach our destiny is by persistence. The only way you get to your destiny is by sticking with it. Now, again, I don't pretend to know how the sovereignty of God and our choices in that play in, but I do know they do intersect, and that you can lose the destiny that God has for you by an unwillingness to stick with the things that he's put in front of you. Always have to throw this in. Not talking about you losing heaven, not talking about you losing the love or the acceptance of the Father, not talking about it causing you to end up with a different eternal destiny, but it is about the fulfillment that God has for you in this life. So you suffer shipwreck. The idea with the shipwrecks that we suffer as we proceed to our destiny. I mean, Paul suffered shipwreck as he proceeded to his destiny. But as we suffer shipwrecks, plural, as we proceed to our destiny, what's going on? What do we need to be telling ourselves? I mean, I think what we need to tell ourselves is that it's just a circumstance or a set of circumstances along the way. We don't like it. We don't necessarily see how it fits in terms of getting to the destinies God has, but that's where faith comes in. Faith doesn't focus on the storm, but faith focuses on the destiny God has. I've used this illustration so many times I know, but I'm going to use it again. I mean, the place we focus on, how we focus, determines in such big measure how we reach the destinies that God has for us. Let's say the destiny that God has for you is that clock in the back. That represents, it's a metaphor, represents your destiny. So you want to look at that. Paul's looking at Rome, looking ahead. This represents the storm, the circumstances that come up in life. This represents COVID-19. It represents November's elections. It represents racial tensions, whatever it is that's getting in the way right now. And so right now, if I'm fixing my attention on all that I'm reading about the horrible riots in Seattle and Portland and Chicago, the murder rate in New York City, I mean, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the pen. And what am I seeing in terms of the destiny? Nothing, absolutely nothing. It's still there, but I can't see it. I'm not moving towards it. What happens if I fix my focus on the destiny, the goal that God has out in front of me? Have the circumstances gone away? No, they haven't gone away, but I'm looking right now, and all I see is the clock I'm looking at. And yes, there's a blur here where I know there's a pin, but it's not what I'm looking at. And it's the same way it's supposed to work for us. And whatever the circumstances are, it's not supposed to be the focal point for where we're being affected in terms of the attention that we're supposed to be playing. The staying on the ship as it was breaking apart wasn't easy. It wasn't something that anybody on that ship really wanted to do. But according to what Paul was saying, and he looks like he was speaking for God, staying on that ship was required in order for the destiny to be accomplished that God had in store. I mean, right now, there are some fathers that are watching online perhaps, or maybe you're right here, that are ready to quit, that are ready to bail because your kids are jerks. And God's saying, stick. You're a husband, same thing, a husband. And you're going, this ain't working. This isn't what I agreed to. This isn't what I committed to on my wedding day. Yeah, it is. It's exactly what you committed to on your wedding day. The circumstances aren't what you like here, but it's what you committed to. And you got to stick. Wives and mothers, same thing. This isn't what I signed up for. Actually, it's exactly what you signed up for. Staying power is what needs to come into play. I mean, whatever the circumstances are right now, that's what they are. Circumstances that are right now. They're not the destiny. They're not the conclusion. They're a distraction. They're a test that tests faith, that tests obedience of faith that comes into play. I mean, what we're all going through right now, we talked about this. I was looking back at sermon notes from back in March when this whole thing started for us in the middle of March. And I think we talked about it, that first message that I preached after we went into quarantine. This was online, obviously. It was the idea that we've got different kind of values that are on display. Public values, private values, core values. We talked about that. And that this COVID-19 season was going to reveal what was public, what was private, what was core. The distinction is this. Public values are those things that we tell people we believe, that we hold in high value. Private values are what we not only tell people we believe, but we actually think we believe those things ourselves. Core values comes when life hits. Core values comes not when you read about the storm, but when you're going through it yourself. And core values show up with how you really live in the middle of the circumstances. It goes beyond what you tell people you believe and value. It goes beyond what you think yourself that you value, and it's tested by actually living through those circumstances. And the core values that we need to have in place, one of them needs to be staying power. That's sticking with it as things don't go exactly as we would like it to go. I mean, it's not what you and I go through that determines where we end up. It's not the circumstances that are going to block where we end up. It's the responses that we have to the circumstances that we go through that really determines where we end up and whether we fulfill the destinies that God has out there for us. I mean, some of you right now are bitter because of a wrong that was done to you, because you're hurt about something. Now, this sounds harsh, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are a lot of people that have been through exactly what you've been through, and they're doing fine because they've chosen not to fix their attention on the bitterness, but to focus on what's ahead. There are some of you out here right now that are discouraged. You're disappointed because things didn't work out the way you thought they would. Things didn't work out according to the plan that you had. Same thing. There are a lot of people that have been through exactly what you've been through, and they're not stuck in the discouragement or disappointment. You look at life in general, and you go, well, you know, I had other plans. I had other things in mind. And it's recognizing that a lot of people had other plans and other things in mind. And the difference between you and them, as you look at their lives, as they seem to be moving on ahead and you seem to be stuck in the past, the difference is not the circumstances, but the difference is the way you have chosen to respond to the circumstances. Now, we want to look at a problem that I was thinking about in terms of how this all works out with staying power. And this is the problem. When we get tired of staying in place, okay? And staying power means not just an hour or two, or even a day or two. Staying power often means a year or two, sometimes a decade or two, okay? So what happens when we get tired of staying power? For Christians, this is what happens. When we get tired of staying power, we start calling it being stuck. We don't call it having staying power. We say, no, I'm stuck. And this is what happens. When you call it stuck, you get stupid. You do. When you get stuck, you get stupid. Because as soon as you start calling yourself stuck, then you think you've got to extricate yourself from whatever the stuckness is, and you do stupid things to get unstuck. And so the storm that you were in, the storm that you've been trying to go through, ends up being exacerbated by the stupid decisions you make as you try to get unstuck and to escape the storm that you're in. COVID-19, alcoholism is through the roof. Why? Because somebody did something stupid in response to their stuckness. They're stuck at home. They respond to the storm by drinking. Binge Netflix watching. I mean, not on the same level perhaps as alcoholism, but same results. I mean, you do something stupid to get unstuck and not understanding that you shouldn't have been trying to get unstuck in the first place. There needed to be staying power in place. When you get stuck, long and short, don't get stupid. You get stuck and you reach for stuff and you reach for the wrong stuff. Relationships. You don't have staying power in your marriage. You feel like you're stuck in a bad relationship. What do? Well, you know what happens so often. You look for alternatives, and those don't work out so well. You make some really bad decisions on what to do. Your finances, same thing. You're going through a shipwreck with your finances. And it's amazing how many people, when their finances are shipwrecked, do what? They go further into debt. They start playing their credit cards. I mean, it's again, making things worse than they needed to be. Your job, your business, where you live, all of these things. We get stuck and we want to give up. We give up working at it. We give up staying with it. We've got a choice, really. When we get stuck, this is a choice. When we need to have staying power and we call it getting stuck, you can use that time to get stupid or to get stronger. To get stupid or to get stronger. And the idea is to use those times of circumstances to shift around in terms of how you're thinking about things. I mean, some of you are going, well, I'm supposed to be retired by now, or I'm supposed to be married by now, or I'm supposed to have had children by now, or I'm supposed to be successful by now. And so when those things don't happen, instead of having the staying power to wait for whatever God is, whatever God has in it, you do something stupid. Turn it around. Turn it around and turn being stuck as a time to get stranger, okay? Instead of getting stupid, get stranger. The idea for us is that's what we're called to be. We've talked about this a lot. I mean, look at Peter. When he talks about it, he says, you're a strange people. Act like it. Do what strange people do. Talk to the creator of the universe. Bring before God those things that need to be brought before God and escape, if it's going to be an escape, into what God has for you next. I mean, the idea is to use it as a time to get stronger. The idea with having staying power, again, is not simply that we have to gut it out, but it's a time when God wants us to learn how to get his help to get stronger in order to be stronger. Well, what am I talking about? Well, think about it this way. Exercise. My wife and I started exercising together, and she wants to become able to do body weight exercises, push-ups, pull-ups, and dips. She cannot do them right now. Can't. Just physically impossible for her right now. So what she's asking me to do is to help her with them. So when she does it, I'll hold her knees, taking off a big portion of her weight as she does the dips or the pull-ups, in order for her to build up strength, and her goal is to one day be able to do these things on her own. I mean, horrible analogy, I know, but in these areas where we need to be seeking out staying power from God, he's saying, I'm going to help you. Now, I'm talking to myself, and I think some of you too. When I come to God for help, I'm saying, God, make it go away. God, make it like this instant change in a second of time. As soon as I open my eyes, God, I want to see that bank balance completely different than it is. And, sometimes God does work that way. And it's wonderful when he does. But most of the time, he doesn't. Most of the time, he wants us to learn as he helps us. He wants us to learn to become stronger, to become wiser, to become people who have perseverance, to push through to the fulfillment of the destinies that he's got not only for us, but for the second and third generation. It's something, again, it's kind of amazing, really, because we talk a lot more about the instantaneous, how do we make this happen stuff, than we do about the staying power, which actually looks to me is what the Bible talks about a bit more. And so we want to be people that go for both, that go for the instant miracles, but also understand what it means to really be seeking out this staying power so that we are able to move on, that we're able to move on past being stuck in the past, being able to move on past being stuck in worrying about the future, being able to be what God wants us to be right now in the present. Okay, just to summarize with this real quickly. Problems to watch for. Problems to watch for when we say that we're stuck. Problems to watch for when the shipwreck happens and we're tempted to abandon the staying power journey. 3 things real quickly. Number one, let's put it up on the screen. Point 1, what we do is we often will listen to the wrong voices. We'll listen to the wrong voices. What we're talking about here is what happens too often for us as we are in that shipwreck season and we're stuck. We start listening to the wrong voices and we start agreeing with the wrong voices. There's power in agreement. There's power in agreement. You see it all through the Bible, Old and New Testament. Old Testament, Tower of Babel. What's that all about? It's about God addressing the power of agreement in a negative sense. He's going, hey, all of these guys are agreeing together against me, and it can do amazing things that I'm not going to allow happen. And so he scatters the nations. It's something we see with Gideon. Gideon, we often think about as the lonely loser, the weak guy who's afraid to do anything. But truly what happens with Gideon is through the power of agreement, he rises up to be a mighty warrior. God says he's a mighty warrior. He doesn't feel like it, but he ultimately agrees with God. And what happens? He leads Israel. He leads Israel to victory. Jesus in the New Testament, Matthew 18, says where 2 or 3 agree, great things can happen. Great things that happen. Power in agreement. So we need to watch out who we're agreeing with. We need to watch out, number one, again, problem is what voices are we listening to? There's a guy named Dr. David McClelland, Harvard psychologist, who says that the people you habitually associate with in person or online are your reference group. And those people determine as much as 95% of your direction in life. Your reference group. So what's that say? What are we talking about? Well, one very practical thing in this COVID-19 season is Question. In fact, in this 21 days prayer and fasting season, question. What is the first thing you listen to when you get up in the morning? Now, if everybody was truthful, which you will not be in church, I know, but if everybody's truthful, you would admit the first thing you look at is your iPhone. Most people do. Christian and non-Christian, they look at their device to see what the news is. Did anything amazing happen on the East Coast? I mean, we're 6 hours different, so we can, get up in the morning and half the world has changed by the time we get up, right? Or do you listen to the creator of the universe? I mean, the deal is in 21 days prayer and fasting, if the first voice you listen to is CNN or Fox, if the first voice you listen to is the political commentaries or the news of the day, then that's your reference group. You might not want to admit it, but it is. It's your reference group. And we've got the opportunity to come in and commune with the creator of the universe, first thing, right off the bat. And it's going to make a world of difference in terms of whether we continue to have staying power or not. Number two, next problem, you create your own second storm by how you deal with the first one. And we already talked about that, so I won't belabor it. First storm comes in, COVID-19, you drink. First storm comes in, you got an argument with your husband or your wife, and you go out and you see somebody else. I mean, the second storm is created by you in response to the first storm, and then it makes the problem, whatever it was, deeper and worse than it ever could have been. And then number three, the third thing to watch out for in those times of being stuck when we're tempted to be stupid is blame. Blame. That's what comes in too often. As you're at that place where you need staying power and you don't like where you are, you start blaming other people for why you are where you are. You blame God sometimes for why you are where you are. And the reality is, to get unstuck, to get on with the progress towards the destiny, you need to own the problem. You need to own the fact that God may want you to be stretched in the midst of this problem. And to move on beyond it and not let the blame that tends to come in block faith. Because that's exactly what it does. Blame blocks faith. Blame causes you and me to focus our attention on what we think the source of the problem is, instead of focusing our attention on the one who has the answers to whatever the problem is. And it's, again, simply a matter of the shifting of focus that needs to come into play. So, wrap up here right now, real quickly. 4 commitments to keep in mind for staying power on the positive side here. 4 commitments to keep in mind for staying power. Number one, we need to be people who believe when we don't see. Who believe when we don't see. Hebrews 11:1. Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. To have staying power, you believe what you don't yet see. You believe, even in the midst of the shipwreck season, what God has coming beyond that. You believe, even in the midst of whatever the hardships are, of what God has in the future in terms of the destiny that he has in front of you. Number two, stay wholehearted. Stay wholehearted in seeking God. Jeremiah 29:13. Jeremiah 29:13 says, "You'll seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." Again, a great thing to be looking at in 21 days prayer and fasting. What does it mean? Seek me with all your heart. What does it mean to go after God wholeheartedly, to be all in? Well, it means effort. It means effort. I mean, it's not legalism. It's not pharisaical to say that you've got to put effort and work into this encounter with God that we want to see. It takes some diligence for us. It takes some what some have called desirable difficulty. Desirable difficulty. In fact, desirable difficulty is a term that simply means that there is a desirable level of difficulty that needs to be in place in order for any good thing to happen. That there's a desirable difficulty that comes into play. It comes into play with exercise. You've got to reach a place of 70% of maximum effort, 70% of your ideal heart rate, 70% before you break through to do any good. You're not going to burn an ounce of fat until you go past the 70% level. And it's the same way in terms of going after God. There's a way in which we just maintain status quo, but there's an all-in fully seeking aspect of it that is the desirable difficulty to see change. You go, can difficulty ever be desirable? If you want to change, yes. Yes. Number 3, obey what I don't understand. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was yet to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. That's one of the most amazing verses in the Bible to me. I mean, it's a statement of faith. He obeyed, even though he didn't understand what he was obeying. That's what faith calls for. God has laid out so much in Scripture that we try to rationalize, that we try to avoid, that we have little discussion groups in order to get around. And he's saying, no, faith is taking it as God has laid it out. And even when we don't understand, even when we don't agree, even when we don't think it sounds just, we obey anyway. This is the secret to staying power. And then finally, number 4, no verse for this. This is just life experience. Stay faithful when you don't feel like it. Stay faithful when you don't feel like it. 21 days of prayer. I've got a lot of days, a lot of times in the day when I don't feel like it in terms of staying faithful. And the staying power that God calls us to involves a commitment to do just that. Believe when we don't see things. Stay wholehearted in seeking after him. Obey what we don't understand. And keep on after it, staying faithful when we don't feel like it. These are, I think, secrets to the breakthrough. Secrets to developing a staying power that releases the favor of God, the blessing of God, and our ability to obtain the destinies that God has for us individually, but also as a church, to see his will done on earth as it is in heaven through us, to be the people who need to reach the islands of Hawaii and the 4 corners of the earth with the message of the kingdom. Last little tidbit of information right now. I was reading yesterday that in this COVID-19 season, most recent statistics show that 32% of people who were formerly regular churchgoers no longer attend or are connected in any way with any church, online or in person. Online or in person. Since March, 32% of people who were regular connectors are no longer connected in any way, online or in person. If you're online, that's fine. I'm talking about people who aren't even watching online. So they're not hearing me now. No good, right? But with millennials, it's 50%. With millennials, it's 50% since March have become completely disconnected. This is a sifting, I think, partly. This is a shipwreck time. This is the time to wake up and to understand that this is a season for staying power. COVID-19 did not take God by surprise. I'm not saying he brought it. I mean, devil's involved with that stuff. But God's using it to shape and shake his church and to say, look, I've got plans that go beyond COVID-19. I've got plans that go beyond November elections. I want you guys to be prepared for those plans. But you've got to know how to persevere to get through this and to move on. Father, thank you for your amazing love, your patience with us, for the instruction of your word. I just ask you to come, Holy Spirit, to bless us with that agreement, to bless us with that ability to agree with your revelation, with what your word says, with the direction that you provide, Holy Spirit, and enable us through that agreement to move forward to the destinies that you've got for us. I just pray this blessing on us now in the power of Jesus Christ's name. Amen.